to today's webinar on education otherwise than school or college. And thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Sally Britton and I'm MD of SnapCare. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Lydia Dunford-Anderson. Lydia is an experienced SEND specialist with extensive knowledge of legal issues and the appeals process. She supports clients throughout the EHCP journey, working with schools, experts, and local authorities to secure positive outcomes. And in March of this year, her book, A Practical Guide to Education Otherwise than School or College, was published by Law Brief Publishing. So welcome, Lydia, and over to you.
Thank you. So hopefully it sounds okay and everyone's here, which is hopefully the main thing from this. So as Sally said, I'm Lydia. I'm a solicitor at Boyd Turner, and in our team we advise parents of children and young people who have SEND through the EHCP process, including EOTAS, which is a term you'll hear me use a lot in the next sort of 45 minutes or so. And my book on the subject was published earlier this year, which I wrote alongside my day job. And I believe there was a discount code that Sally kindly sent round as part of the invite for this webinar, where you can get 10% off if you buy direct. I can also put that in the chat box as well if anyone would like it. This webinar will hopefully give you a brief oversight as to what EOTAS is, what it's not, key kind of points to be aware of. Again, yes, it's obviously not going to cover everything, but hopefully it'll give you enough information to get you started. So I believe, Sally, you had some questions that you wanted to ask.
Yes, yeah. So how we're going to do this is we have some set questions, and so I'll ask Lydia these questions, and then she will respond to those questions. And please put your own questions into the chat if you have any as we go along, and Nikki will read them out on your behalf.
Yes.
So the first.
Sorry, people have asked for the discount code already. So
very good.
So I can put that in now. I believe this should work, and if you it's direct from the publishers.
We do have it on one of the slides as well. So if there's any difficulty there, it is on one of the slides as well.
Thank you.
Super. Okay. So I was pleased to hear how you actually pronounced it, because I was going to say what is EOTAS, but how did you pronounce it?
I say EOTAS.
EOTAS.
I take out the C because it gets, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Lydia, what is EOTAS?
It's essentially the process or the definition of when a child or young person who has SEND, first off, has an EHCP, which is one of the key parts, is educated predominantly outside of a school or college setting. It's in the name, essentially. There are lots of specifics that go into that. But the key points are that it's inappropriate for that child or young person to receive their education in a school or college setting, or it could be preschool as well, nursery settings, through a standard school college setup. So you're saying it would not be appropriate for them to be going to a school or college for the standard, say, 5 days a week routine to receive their educational provision through their EHCP. In a nutshell, that's essentially what it is.
Okay. And who is responsible for the EOTAS?
So it's local authority. Because a child or young person would have to have an EHCP. I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with EHCPs. Their education, health and care plans for children or young people with SEND who require additional support beyond maintained placement resources. I'm well aware that there's a lot in the news at the moment about SEND reviews and potential changes. At the moment, the law is still what it is, so that's what this is going to be talking about. Just in case anyone had any questions about potential changes, at the moment it's still this. So local authorities are responsible for EOTAS, and there are, again, requirements needed in terms of the EHCP to secure that that local authority where the child or young person lives, to make sure they do actually deliver it. And this goes into what's in the EHCP, what sections of the EHCP as well. So there's quite a few specifics. Anything that isn't covered in questions as they come up, I can always add into as need be, because like I say, there's a lot of things into this to kind of tie it all together.
I do have a few questions. Would you like me to put those questions now, Lydia?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. This is from Kelly. So how do we hold the LA accountable when we have agreed EOTAS package with funding by direct payment, but no communication since annual review on the 16th of July 2024?
Okay. I mean, there are options to formally challenge a local authority if there's provision in an EHCP that the LA has to legally deliver, and if they are not delivering that, I can see you your emails there as well. So that will be something that will be easier to email directly, because there's a few things that might be looking into for that. But essentially, there are options to follow up with the local authority. Absolutely.
Okay. And Joe has asked, how would you evidence EOTAS need school is inappropriate?
So that's a very sort of, yeah, it's an important question, because that is one of the key factors when you're looking at an individual child or young person and deciding if EOTAS is what they need. There are essentially numerous ways you can evidence it's inappropriate. There was a very interesting case from, gosh, about 2 years ago now, 2009, that gave a very sort of good overview of saying what needs to be considered. So you're looking at things like the child's background, their needs, what provisions can be provided at the placement, the costs, what parents' wishes are, and anything else that might apply. So it's potentially really vast. Something I talk about in my book is the fact that you're, with any requested changes to an EHCP, or if you're asking for a specific placement, or if you're asking for EOTAS, you need to have good expert evidence to back that up. So you'd be looking at things like an educational psychologist, looking at key expert. You can have other experts like speech therapists, occupational, physio. It can be really broad, and it's always coming back to the individual child's need. And I mean, the examples I've had have been where if a child, because of their sleep, they can't, they might not sleep well during the night, and then they can't access that kind of 9 to 5 going into a school setting every day. And actually, it has to be tailored to hours that fit them, or it to do with the actual environment of the setting. There are potentially lots of different reasons. Again, it's individual expert and other evidence that you've got.
Okay, I mean, there are a few more questions. The questions are coming through. So do you want me to go through all of these individual questions now, or should we do it at the end? How would you prefer to?
Maybe we'll pick up something that we'll carry on to Sally's next question, and then we'll see if that may well cover some of these potentially. And then I can always pick them up at the end.
Okay.
So is an education and healthcare plan needed for EOTAS?
Yeah. You have to have an EHCP. That process to get an EHCP plan, I won't cover here. But you need to have one in place. It's then going back into how EOTAS is worded in that EHCP, and this is also something where there's been quite a lot of case law, different thoughts on it, as to, well, you're not, the standard process is you would have an EHC plan and it'd have the needs, the provision, and then the school or college placement named, and that's what it kind of is building up to, is where that child or young person will go to school, what provision will they get. For EOTAS, it's slightly different. So you need that provision. As with any provision, it needs to be clear what provision, special educational provision that child or young person needs, even if it's outside of school or college setting. So you're looking at things for it to be clear, specific. So what is the provision? So it could be speech therapy, occupational therapy. I've seen ones where it can be much broader than that. So you can have things to do with groups, potentially thoughts, but it has to be clear. That provision would be in section F, which of the EHCP, as you would expect for any other plan. And it's then a question of where does the actual confirmation of it being otherwise than at school or college go? Generally, well, that goes in section F, because it is not a placement. It's not a place that a child or young person can attend. It's describing how the provision will be delivered to them. So EOTAS would be in section F, and generally section I, which is your placement, that's generally left blank. If you're saying EOTAS, and a child is not going to be going to any school or college setting at all, it's going to be all delivered bespoke, usually at home. That's often where you find this provision is delivered. But you also can't name a child or young person at home, because that's not an educational institution, that's not a school or college. So that can't be put down as a placement. So it's slightly weird, because the law sort of sets out that section I should have something in it. But if no, the only exception is if you have an EOTAS, but that child or young person is actually able to go to a school or college for some provision. So this is coming back to the point about them being able to attend a standard school or college setup. So even if they can't go into school or college for 5 days a week, 9 to 3, but actually they are going into there for a specific provision. So it might be like a particular group therapy or hydrotherapy, because there might be a swimming pool there, or it might be something specifically they are actually going to a school site. You would then name that placement in section I, even though they're only going there for a small amount of time a week. So it's a bit of an odd way to do it, but that's what case law has kind of gone through and examined from all different aspects and gone, no, this is how we will do it. But I'm saying this obviously broadly, and with anything, and as Sally has said, if there's a specific query about it, it's always worth getting advice in your circumstance, because it can be a bit complicated. And so the wording of what's in the EHCP is really important.
Is there any questions there, Nikki, that is relevant to ask at the moment, or are we going to wait until the next question, until the end?
There's quite some detailed questions, and people have included their email address. So
Okay.
that would be maybe better for Lydia.
Yeah.
I mean, I could just pick one that's maybe a little bit shorter. How does this work with children living in Wales? I'm supporting a child living in Wales and they do not have EHCPs. Please email response if not covered today.
Yes, so we there's a different system in Wales. It's not one I know a great deal of. But I can certainly respond, and if we can find out how to progress that for you. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so what evidence do I need? I think we sort of touched on that really because of the other sort of question.
Yeah, and I've seen a few questions in the chat that are kind of covering that as well, talking about the evidence and experts. Again, it's always dependent on the individual. It depends on what information you've already got. Quite often, if you're in a placement already and that's potentially breaking down, or it's on a reduced timetable, or it's clearly it's not working, that information is really important as well. It's kind of building this picture of, okay, in terms of all of the child's special educational needs, which are very broad, that can cover from cognition, but not solely. We can be looking at communication, social, emotional, mental health. It's often a really important factor in this as well, in terms of accessing a school setting, as is sensory, physical. So it's pulling all that together from the relevant experts. Quite often that does involve getting independent experts in if there are gaps, if they're treating or kind of assigned therapist reports don't quite cover everything that you feel they need to. But if you've got information already there supporting that actually this child cannot access in the school or college because of the type of provision they require that just cannot be delivered, then it's that all helpful. Again, it all needs to be considered. I would say to have someone who has an understanding of the area, get legal advice on it. Then it's having that knowledge before you then go to your local authority and what you're asking for EOTAS from the beginning, saying, right, we'd like this because our child has these needs, this is the provision we require. It cannot be delivered in a school or college through a standard setup, and here's why. So yeah, there's a lot of things to potentially consider, and I'm just having a look. And I thought I saw a question potentially, but kind of new to this. So
there was one thing that you haven't touched on is the difference between alternative provision and EOTAs.
That was the one, yeah.
Considering the financial difficulties faced by LAs due to the EHCPs, how is the EOTAS model sustainable? That's from Emma.
Yes, no, I think that's the one I was looking at. So alternative provision is if the child or young person cannot access the school or college, and you would think of things like a crew or a referral unit or other alternative provision, something more bespoke. So those potentially can tie into it, because again, the key point we've always got to go back to is, can the child or young person, so would it be appropriate for that child or young person to receive their provision through a standard school setup? And if you're already looking into alternative provisions, so something where it's more bespoke, it's often smaller groups, or it's for shorter sessions, or it works differently, then you're already kind of building that evidence to say, well, yes, the kind of standard school setup doesn't work, and who's actually able to prove it. And so potentially, if that's in an identified setting, educational institution, it's a registered place, then potentially you would be looking at having that alternative provision detailed in the EHCP as well, to say this is part of where they're receiving their support. Again, each circumstance, it depends on information. And in terms of funding, ultimately it's on the local authority to fund what is in the EHCP. This is the educational part I'm talking about. So the Section F provision, which is really important. That's why it has to be clear and specific. And then the placement, if there is one, in Section I, that is on the local authority to do. And if it's clear and specific, and there's nothing ambiguous in there, or there's no kind of reference to, parents are making their own arrangements, for example, or parents have chosen this setup, then it would be going back to the LA. You have an absolute duty to do this, because ultimately, if provision is not in place and a child or young person is of compulsory school age, so you're going up until the summer that they turn 16, I believe it is, then the LA has to provide something that's suitable, appropriate to their needs, as equivalent to full time that they can manage based on their needs. So that they still have a duty to provide something. It's just slightly different. If there's an EHCP, you're going by what that says. If otherwise you're looking at, you have a statutory duty to provide provision whilst they are out of school, separate from the EHCP, essentially. So that's why the wording in the EHCP is really important.
Right, thank you. And what are my options if ETAS is not agreed?
So EOTAS is something that the LA has to agree to. And one of the points from earlier was about parents' wishes need to be considered, and views about EOTAS. Quite often requests for EOTAS will come from parents. It's to the local authority, so you have several options depending on what stage of the EHCP process you're at. So this is beyond, you've had an EHCP assessment, for example, and you've got a draft plan either being prepared or it's been finalised. So you would initially be saying that when it's in draft stage, the EHCP, we would like EOTAS detail in Section F to set out that these provisions will be delivered otherwise than at school, and to include, if you have a placement that's your preference, that you want to be named in Section I. So again, that's not always applicable. If you are saying, actually, no, that they are going to be solely outside of the school or college setting, they're going to be something completely bespoke at home somewhere else, but not in a registered school setting, then Section I would say blank. And if you did have a placement, you said, oh well, I want them out of school, aside from going in for this provision, then you would be saying Section I will have to name this setting. So that's when you put it to the LA. They consider it. They will then decide if they agree, going on the evidence, going on what's there. Their experts have said, if experts have been involved, which they probably would have been by that point. Once the plan is finalised, you have a right to appeal that to the SEND tribunal, and that would be as per any other appeal of an EHCP. The content and potentially the placement. So it might be that the LA named the placement and was like, no, we don't feel it is suitable, or they've named one, but you said, well, actually, we want this other placement because this is where we want our child to go to receive this part of their EOTAS provision specifically. Appeals are very lengthy, and there's probably quite a few of you who've been through the process. At the moment, timetables for SEND appeals are a year. Some we're getting them for 13 months for a hearing date to be registered, which is a very, very long time. So you've got an appeal option. You've also got the option to go to mediation before an appeal. It doesn't then preclude you from appealing if you need to. All of these options are aiming to work with the local authority, and it's aiming to, if you can, resolve things. And for lots of appeals, they do resolve. When and if they do, depends on what extra evidence you've got, what evidence they have, and anything else that comes up through the lifespan of a potentially year-long appeal, which is a very long time. The other option you've got is when your EHCP is coming up for its annual review and you want to put forward changes. So yes, we would like to go to EOTAS, the current placement will have broken down, or they're not pending, or whatever it may be. So for each of these points, you would be putting the evidence to the LA for planning ahead, and after an annual review, you then have a right to appeal as well if it was necessary. I mean, I had one where it was a year-long timetable, asking for EOTAS, and that resolved about a month before the hearing. The LA turned around and said, yeah, we'll agree to everything, after kind of holding steadfast that a school placement is the option. And this was a school placement that the child had not been able to attend for several years. And so, it was still a long process, but again, it's evidence-based. And that's ultimately what the tribunal would be looking at. And it's going into, I suppose, any of these processes where you're challenging them, to be aware that it can take a very long time. Even if you're going with the evidence and you're pushing, there isn't a guarantee as to if or when a local authority might say, actually, yeah, we see this now, we can see that this is what's needed. But with any of them, it's absolutely worth getting advice if you're, going into an appeal, or you've just lodged one, or you're coming up to a review, things like that. It's worth getting advice.
So we've got a couple of questions, just if I just go through, there's a few questions on there, but again, people have provided their email, so it would be great for you to get back on some of the specific questions. But from Joe, our local authority states they don't do EOTAS or fund AP. Is it legal for them to say this? I'm guessing any challenge would be via tribunal.
I've just been questioning now. They don't do it. No, if the authority is applying their policy over the law, then that absolutely is something that can be challenged, because law trumps over policy. And I've seen local authorities who've had specific policies on certain aspects of the EHCP process, but it's always going back to what the law says. So challenge via tribunal, potentially not. You've got other options like a formal complaint. There's potentially the option to go down judicial review proceedings. Those things you would need to get advice on because there are judicial review, or at least starting that process requires quite specific requirements. But if they're saying policy, they're going to apply their policy, not the law, then that is an issue. I think that was it.
Okay. AP can be assessed without an EHCP, ETOS cannot, and that's from Emma.
Was that a question? So you can.
AP can be assessed without an EHCP, ETOS cannot. Is that correct? I'm assuming it's a question.
Oh, I see. Yes, so the child might be an alternative provision, if they have an EHCP or not. But yes, EOTAS is specifically applies if there's an EHCP in place. Yeah.
Okay. And one more from Anika. Annual review is another issue. We haven't managed to secure even an answer to emails that an annual review is due.
Okay. Again, yeah, that sounds. I mean, yeah, that's a specific point. There are options you can raise with the LA. You can press with complaints again, potentially judicial review, because there are timeframes that local authorities have to adhere to in terms of annual reviews and their decisions. And that's something we do come across fairly often, that they might delay. So yeah, but provided there's an email, then I can obviously respond to that directly.
Okay.
So are there any other questions that we want to?
Again, they're quite specific. So there's email addresses attached to those. So
I haven't covered, which might address some questions, it might not, is just to clarify what EOTAS, obviously what it is, but also what it's not, because I'm aware that there are situations when children might be out of school for various reasons. If you electively, as a parent, if you electively arrange education for your child or young person, and that's not EOTAS, you are making those arrangements, and therefore the local authority doesn't have to provide any provision. So that's potentially something that can get potentially muddled. Again, that's why it's important that the EHCP is clear that the EOTAS arrangement is not until preference, and they've not made their own arrangement. It's this is what the ELA has to deliver legally. So it's being aware if you're making your own arrangements or not. The other one, which I've covered briefly, was if a child or young person is out of school for whatever reason, and including if there's no EHCP, the local authority has to provide provision that's suitable, accessible, and as full-time as their needs to manage. So I'm kind of thinking broadly, say if they start at the school placement named in their EHCP and then it breaks down and they're not able to attend, the LA has to provide something during that interim. If there's an EHCP, you would be wanting an emergency annual review to say, well, current placement clearly does not work. What are the other options? So again, that's on the local authority. You're looking at the reason why a child or young person is not in their named setting. The other options that you're making across are, those are the main ones. If a child is excluded from school, then that is also separate, a separate process, but again, that's not this EOTAS process. So just being aware that there are potential different option scenarios when the child might be out of school. but it's just being aware and seeking advice if you need it as to why they're out of school and therefore who's legally responsible to deliver provision going forward. So that often that can get a little bit muddled as well.
Okay. There's a question here from Holly. What if partway through EHCP app and then removed from mainstream and start online privately? Can I continue to appeal the request from EOTAS?
No, I think that though, if you're partly through the EHCP, I don't know what the app means. So if you start making your own arrangements for education, that the LA does not have to provide anything. But yes, you can still appeal the EHCP thing like EOTAS. All the while you're making your own arrangements, the LA doesn't have to provide provision because you elected to do that and provided they're satisfied that those arrangements are appropriate. So yes, you can. I come across situations where parents make their own arrangements during the course of an appeal because they don't want to go to the local authority school. They think, well, if we can start them at the placement we want, we'll do that. It's just bearing in mind the risk that you might have to be funding that for potentially quite a long time if it's through an appeal, which I think they're taking up for about a year at the moment.
Okay. Do you want me to go through some of the questions that have come up on?
Sure, yeah, no, I'll do what I can. And just do the question.
Am I right in thinking that you can request an emergency EHCP review if a school placement is not working, has broken down, and that's from Joe?
Yeah, yes, that would be sensible. Yeah.
What if I'm partway through EHCP? Oh no, sorry, that's the one that we just. Sorry, there's quite a few that have just come through. Should a local authority fund a one-to-one for a child to attend any test provision? Can we source this person privately?
So, provided that the EHCP in Section F says one-to-one support, if it's clear for how many hours, if it's clear for the specifics, then if that detail's in Section F, then yes, I would be going to the you have to fund everything that's in Section F. So yes, that's saying one-to-one provision to attend your task provision. So yes, if it's detailed and clear, I'd be going to the LA. And it says if you can source them privately, you can choose to do that. The LA then wouldn't have to cover those costs unless they've agreed to do so. Quite often it's worth asking. And again, I've come across this where you ask and say, we've either got an expert or therapist already involved with the child, or we've got them lined up. The LA has to agree. They may say yes, but the person we would have had is cheaper, so you have to pay the difference. They may say, no, we've got someone who we're going to put in place. And if you choose to put this other person in place, you're making those arrangements, so you have to fund that cost because you're choosing to do that. But yeah, each case is obviously different.
Mm-hmm. And Emma's asked, can you touch on the difficulties of safeguarding with EOTAS?
I'm not quite sure what specific. I think I need a bit more information.
Okay.
Say, a lot of these I appreciate will be quite specific to the situation, so that's fine. something that also I realised I haven't mentioned is when you were asking Sally how to pronounce it and what's it called, quite often you'll come across EOTAS. So that's something that you might see. So it, in school or college rather than at. Yeah, it's just something to be aware of in case you see it. Well, is that the same thing? It is. Just some places you'll see it referred to as EOTAS. But based on what the actual legal definition says, it's quite school. So that's why I've stuck with EOTAS. So yeah.
It's helpful to know these differences though, because you can be reading something and think, well, what's that? There's so many different acronyms, aren't they, for things? So
And full of acronyms, and I'm saying SEN as well. It's all acronyms for a lot of it, but yeah, it's the same thing.
So Denise is asked as well, can you request EOTAS during emergency EHCP review?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we would go into that review as you would for any other, quickly have evidence to show that placement's broken down, or this is what your evidence, experts or professionals are saying is required, why it has to be outside of a school or college setting for a standard setup. Yes, you put it to the LA, and then you have the right to appeal if after that review they don't make the changes that you've asked for.
Okay. And not all, Hayley has asked, not all EOTAS provisions are Ofsted approved. Is this correct? Will this affect the LA decision?
So I didn't think that would be an issue. I can recall a time when there was a newly built school that hadn't yet been Ofsted approved, and it didn't, from memory, it didn't cause an issue, and that was in an appeal. In theory, I don't think that would cause a problem. But it's worth just, guessing the advice if there's a specific, the specific details on it, I would say.
Okay. Marianne has asked, LA have said that tutors need to be on approved list of providers. Is that correct?
So that kind of goes over the point about you can the LA has to provide what the EHCP. So yes, they would be ultimately employing them, assigning them. But if you choose to go for someone else, or the LA agrees to, then obviously that's fine as well. Yes, I have come across LAs will go through their approved list of their kind of requirements as to who they can directly involve in it. But again, it depends on each situation.
Okay, and Marianne has asked, can you request to manage EOTAS yourself via a personal budget?
So the personal budgets, actually, this is another question. So personal budgets are part of they're not required for EOTAS. So in an EHCP, personal budgets are under Section J. The local authority has to agree with a personal budget. If they do, it only for provision in Section F, for some of it or it. So you can ask for one, say we would like the funding to deliver these provisions for EOTAS. LA has to agree. If they say no, it's a direct follow-up to the LA, rather than through the tribunal. I have seen it where personal budgets are agreed for EOTAS, often because the experts are they may have been privately funded going into the process. So say if the patient's broken down, these therapist professionals have been brought in, then if the local authority agrees, then to fund those, then yes, personal budget seems a sensible way. They don't have to agree. That's the other thing. They have to fund what the provision is. That's going back to it being really clear and specific. And there's another question that links onto that. Can you request it for expenses covered, such as textbooks, trips, noise cancelling headphones? Again, it's if for provision within section F. Because if there's provision, it gets potentially a bit murky when we're talking about things like textbooks and the materials, because you go, well, in a school you would have these as standard because they're just there, part of it. But I would absolutely be saying it's on the LA to be providing a provision. How specific you go in terms of the materials needed depends on the individual circumstance. But things like noise cancelling headphones, that those I think are you can afford those stuff or not. Again, it's about what the child needs to access that provision, which is ultimately from the LA, and that's you as a parent who will arrangement. So yeah, and again, often evidence for that would be coming from tutors, therapists, professionals. They are saying these resources are required. That's what we're going with.
Okay. And Susie has asked, how do you get the LA to quality assure an online provider, even though MVA is DFE registered and had recent Ofsted?
I'm not sure, in all honesty. That kind of sounds like it's coming back into sort of LA policy, LA requirements for it. That would be something that we were with advice on specific things quite particular.
So, are there any other general questions, or should we just move on now? The rest of them for sort of email questions.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of specific questions there. So
sure, I can see. So, I mean, I don't think we've ever had quite so many questions, and obviously this is a subject where people definitely need to have information, and I always feel it's very tough on parents that they have to deal with all of this and have to understand all this, get all this information themselves and sort of deal with it. Hopefully webinars like this are going to be helpful in terms of providing information. We do have another 5 of these in this series with Lydia. So we're going to have one a month. And these are the dates, but we will send you out the dates and we'll be sending out links for each of these ones to anybody who's attended today. As we've discussed, we will forward all of the questions to Lydia. So Lydia, you're going to be quite busy, I think, with there's quite a few questions there.
Yeah, I do best. And if, like I said, if there's any which aren't my area, then I will do what I can to try and help.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. So we will send everybody who's joined the webinar today, we'll send you a recording. And I'm apologies, I think that Lydia's sound wasn't quite so clear all the time. So I hope you got sort of most of the information. For the next one, we'll just sort of see if there's something else that we can do to make it a little bit clearer, because it was a little bit muffled. But hopefully you got the most of that information. And we will send out some different slides that have a bit more information and some additional kind of information on this, plus the link to the next webinar. And if anybody has their phones with them and they want to access the discount for Lydia's book, if you go there, that's the discount code, and the QR code will take you straight to the website. But we'll send all of this out to everybody. So thank you everybody for joining, and of course thank you very much, Lydia, for all of that information. There is so much to unpack around these topics, and but we really appreciate you coming on here, and obviously for the ones that you're going to do as well. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Super. Well, I'll say goodbye to everybody, and thank you again for joining us. And we hope to see you at the next webinar, which will be in a month's time. Bye for now.
Bye.